Good evening and welcome to our second session of CrimeCONN, a fantastic collaboration of the Mystery Writers of America, New York chapter, and the Friends of the Ferguson Library. We've been doing CrimeCONN in person for a couple of years, and now we've decided to take it virtual. It's for mystery lovers and mystery writers wannabe and mystery writers published. It's for all of us. And with that, I would like to introduce Deb Golden from the Friends of the Ferguson Library, because without their support, not only would we not be able to have CrimeCONN, but there's many other programs that we would not be able to have. So Deb?
Hi, thank you, Alice, and welcome to another wonderful Ferguson Library Community Connection event. It is no mystery that our library is at the center of our city, serving everyone. Working alongside Alice's terrific team is another team also focused on creating and delivering impactful experiences for our ever-widening audience, the Friends of the Ferguson Library. The Friends is a nonprofit volunteer organization established back in 1971 to support the priorities, programs, and activities of the Ferguson Library. Thanks to our varied initiatives, such as our literary competition, our Books for Babies campaign, literary pub crawl, library mini golf, our author series, and our two amazing used bookshops, the Friends are not only helping the library team bring the joy of reading, learning, and curiosity to Stamford, but are also a valued and valuable source of financial support. Thank you for participating tonight. I am certain you will have a wonderful time, and we hope you will consider becoming a friend of the Ferguson Library. I am sure you can appreciate that this year, the library and the Friends need your support more than ever. And so that you don't have to do too much detective work, a link to our membership application will pop up on the screen this evening. And now I am very happy to announce and to introduce to you tonight's MC. Connecticut writer Tom Straw is an Emmy-nominated TV producer and author of 7 New York Times bestsellers under the pen name Richard Castle. He still writes and produces TV, most recently Showtime's Nurse Jackie, and is also a director of the National Board of the Mystery Writers of America. Tom.
Thank you, Deborah, and to everyone at the Ferguson Library in Stamford for making tonight's event possible. You know, for years, the Ferguson Library has been a terrific venue to host CrimeCONN's annual in-person panels. Well, now they have set up the Mystery Writers of America New York, Connecticut chapter, so we can go virtual in these uncertain times, as we call them. Yes, there is less IRL, but hopefully more OMG. That is going to be supplied right now by our panel, which is entitled, "Do You Really Want to Write That? The Choices That Writers Make." And who better to know than tonight's moderator? David Rich is a novelist and screenwriter and playwright. His third novel, The Mirrored Palace, a spy story set in 19th century Arabia on the Hajj, will be published in December. David, it's all yours.
Thank you, Tom. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you, thank you, Deborah. So for me, you see a million movie scenes of writers writing, and they're writing away and they're throwing away pages. But the one that resonates most is in adaptation, when Nick Cage sits down, he writes about a sentence and a half, and he says, "I really need a muffin." It's the choices, it's the decisions that drive us to the refrigerator, walk in the woods, the obsession that we must now train the cat to fetch. It's the choices are hard. It's why writing is exhausting. It's why people stop. And we're going to talk about that tonight with 3 very interesting Connecticut writers who've all written mysteries, and each one very different from the other. I'm going to introduce them, and then we'll get to the questions. Tessa Wegert is a longtime journalist who's moved to Connecticut, and her first novel, A Death in the Family, is a modern day Gothic mystery. It's grown on the same tree as Wilkie Collins' the Brontes, Jean Rhys, and Daphne du Maurier. It's got all the pieces there, the Gothic location and everything else. It's very interesting. Hello, Tessa.
Hi, David. Thanks so much.
Nikki Woolfolk is a chocolatier and a writer of 6 novels.
For now, yes.
6 novels for now. I read her first novel is Maison Death. It features a chef, as you might imagine, a baker and chef, and it's filled with feasts. And in fact, it's a steampunk novel, and it's a feast for the imagination and of the imagination. She creates her own world, a world with its own social dynamic. And she says it's Louisiana in 1881, but it's much more. Really fascinating. Hello, Nikki.
Thank you. Hi.
Nina Mansfield, there are more people listening here tonight than there are in this exclusive club that Nina is a member of, which is called Successful Playwright. There's no one in that group. And her plays are produced all over the country, short plays, long plays, they're published. And she's written a YA murder mystery. Think of it this way, is Holden Caulfield somehow, maybe he was in New York, met up with Nancy Drew, and things happened as they do, and their spawn, Nina got a hold of their spawn and sent her to a beach community in Rhode Island for the summer without parents. And murder and mayhem follows. So we'll start right in. There's a chicken and egg question. Do you have the bones of your story first, or do you have the location first? I'm going to start with Tessa, who's got this fantastic Gothic location. Was it a case of you saw the place and said, a murder goes on there, or you sort of thought of the bones of a story and said, I need a location?
In this case, I definitely started with the location. It's set in the Thousand Islands of upstate New York, an area that I have been visiting every summer once or twice for almost 20 years. And it's actually the place where I met my husband's family for the first time, because when we were dating way back when, his parents had a place up there, and that's where I went for the weekend to meet his entire family, his brother, his sister-in-law, the parent, everybody, whole crowd of them. And I found myself on this small island that you could only access by boat. And having the imagination, I guess, that I have, and maybe somewhat of a propensity to think to the dark side of things, I started to wonder what would happen if we didn't get along. And now I'm stranded on this island. How am I going to get, what if it feels like it could be a potentially very uncomfortable situation? And then the next place my mind went was, what if there was a crime on one of these islands in the Thousand Islands? And how would someone deal with something like that? And would it be the Coast Guard who was involved? Would it be the local sheriff? Would someone come by boat? And how would it all play out? So for me, with this story, it definitely was about setting. I knew I wanted to try to write a mystery. I had been writing fiction for almost 10 years, but mainly thrillers. None of them had been published yet. And when I decided I'd try my hand at a mystery, it just seemed like the perfect location for it. I knew I wanted to do something that was along the lines of Agatha Christie's And Then There Were None. And there was this island setting that I was really familiar with. So I just kind of ran with it.
Terrific. Terrific. Now, Nikki, you're going to, in part of your answer, you're going to have to explain to people what steampunk is. I had never read a steampunk novel. So for you, was it you're into this and you're going to add a murder, or you had the murder sort of when you thought of the steampunk, the machinery of steampunk? How did it work for you?
Always murder mystery first. That's I grew up on that. So that's exactly where my mind goes. For steampunk, it started off where I was doing novellas, rom-com novellas that were set in a steampunk world, but it was written on a dare because I wasn't seeing steampunk with people of color. It was suddenly, okay, we've got these really great gadgets, but the history is still the same and we're being written out of it. So as a dare, it was like, I want to see a romance, I want to see adventure, I want to see mystery that have Black and brown faces too. But I also want to see gadgetry because I really wanted to play around with that. And so with Maison Death, it started off with the murder, but it was like, what is the most interesting way I can kill off somebody? And I was like, oh, I know, a Rube Goldberg machine. So I fudged and put it a little bit further back because was it Rube Goldberg, the cartoonist, was doing his work in 1930, I think, 1935.
Mm-hmm.
And so my book takes place in an alternate Louisiana, so around 1881. But I really, really wanted to kill off somebody really interestingly. And so when I wrote that part, it was partially with making sure that everything was correct because I used to work with engineers. So once I got that scene correct, I went back to my engineering friends saying, does this work correctly? Because I needed to make sure that it was a Chinese popcorn machine, which if you were doing things in an airship, you cannot have open flames. So I had all this science that you will not see, but basically in order to understand how everything works. So with steampunk, think of it as, if anybody remembers the old show, Wild Wild West.
Sure.
So think of it as Victorian age type things with modern gadgetry. But for and so for myself, when it came to steampunk, wanting to see a little bit more representation, but also I didn't want to write the same world over and over again. So it started with one thought that I had as a kid, which was, what would have happened? What would our world have been like if the Civil War hadn't have happened? If, you know, slavery had ended a lot sooner, like all these different dynamics, how far would we grow? But also there's still going to be conflict. And so that's where the steampunk kind of world came to be. So it started from the novellas and then it moved into more of the novels. So Maison Death is the first of many novels that are coming into this world that are going to be expanding it even more so.
Excellent. Excellent. Really works well. Nina, you are muted. There you go.
There I am.
Did you have, I mean, I imagine in your case, you had the character and went for, am I right?
I think I actually also started with location.
Really?
Tessa, I used to vacation in Misquamicut, Rhode Island, and I just had this sense of salt and sea, and I knew I wanted to write YA because I work with high schoolers, and their voices were just, you know, in my head. And I think I started writing the novel right after I'd started teaching high school, my first summer after that, and I just was latching onto the location of the salt, the sea, and of course it was going to have murder because that's kind of where my brain goes. And the character slowly grew. You know, I sort of say all the characters are always part me, so I'm not entirely sure where she came from, but definitely location first.
Interesting. Interesting. Now, location, plot, everything's important. The most important thing, I think, are the people, your lead characters and their relationships. And those, a lot of hard choices come with that. And I think that stops a lot of writers because they tend to focus on what the lead character is doing in terms of the plot and not in terms of the other people. But you all conquered that. Each one of you did that beautifully, I thought. So Nikki, you are a chef. Alex is a chef. And to me, writing it, I mean, the main relationship is with Pierre, I thought. That was, you know, really things turned on that. So talk a little bit about how you developed that, Josephine, without giving too much away. We'll say that Pierre gets in some trouble. Yes. And also Josephine is important, and all your family is important. Talk a little bit about that.
Maison Death started, I started plotting it about almost 12, 13 years ago.
Wow.
I had gotten into cooking I had never really been into cooking, and at that same time that had happened. So I was making chocolates and learning about all these different things. And so Alex came together based on a lot of the work that I did behind the scenes at culinary school. You'd be amazed with the level of pranks. I had to tone it down in the story, but the pranks are legendary. Like, I cannot wait to write more pranks. They're great. But when it comes to that storyline, my son is 14. So if you do the math, you kind of figure out that around that time I had my little pea pod, my son. And, you know, obviously he's so important to me. And I thought, well, what would happen if, you know, I'm starting this new life and, you know, everything's going swimmingly and I've got this plan, and you know what happens when you have a plan, it just doesn't turn out the way you want. So I thought, what would happen? Like, what's the worst what is the worst thing that could happen in a story? And that is for a mom to want a new life for their son, and suddenly, by no fault of his own, he gets into trouble. He gets blamed for something he did not do. So what is a parent to do about that? They're not going to sit idly by. But at the same time, you know, they still, if they're a single parent, they still have a job to do. So they really can't sit there and try to focus only on their kid and then not on the job. So there's all these different things that are coming into play. So I wanted to not only write the mystery in that manner of what's the worst that could happen, but make it kind of funny, because, well, funny murders are a little odd, but that's fun. But I also wanted to write more of a story of the family that we have is not always by blood. Because for me, I've moved around so many times, and a lot of my family are my friends. So it really came from that. And also because of working in the hospitality industry, working with chefs and cooks, and there really is this found family behind it. Also, I wanted to write a story, no matter what the genre was. I really wanted to write a story where they weren't straight people. So my main character is not straight. So I have a bisexual heroine, a lesbian potential lover. And I wanted to write a story that was more about solving the murder, having an adventure, you know, figuring out the mystery and having it be something fun instead of, as I call it, the Saturday afternoon school special where it's so depressing. So either somebody's coming out and somebody's pushing somebody back in. Instead, I really just wanted to focus on the joy and also make readers as hungry as humanly possible so they would hate me. So, yeah.
Excellent, excellent. Well, you got it. You got it. Now, Nina, you've got Aunt Bobby, you've got Lauren, but, you know, having a 15-year-old, there's a different level of connection. Talk a little bit about that, dealing with a 15-year-old. She meets these people and right away she's friends with them, and, you know, the time it takes a ball to go over the volleyball net.
I think there's certainly with teenagers, there is this longing to be accepted. And I was really channeling my my 15-year-old self. And wanting to, you know, having a group of friends. I'm thinking, you know, back in the day, I had friends, they had a lake home. There's a boating accident that actually takes place in the book, and that was based on an actual boating accident. But also that just idea of the buddy story. I find that's a theme that comes into a lot of my work, where there's a strong female friendship and something happens, right? Something mysterious happens. And in this case, it's her friend disappearing. So that need for to go find her friend, right? She's just met these people, and what, you know, as a teenager without your friends, it's kind of devastating.
Right. Yes, very much. Now, Tessa, you've got Shanna. Shanna or Shayna? Shayna is the lead detective, and she's a detective, and she's got a fiance, and you've got that relationship, and that takes, I don't want to say too much, but a turn, and relationships with the partner, the partner she works with, and a backstory relationship as well. That's very, very much talk a little bit about developing the character in those terms.
Sure. I'm a really big fan of mysteries that have a couple of interesting subplots going on. I feel like it just adds some depth to the story and makes it just a richer experience. So I knew I wanted to have some kind of backstory that had something that had happened that had traumatized her. I hadn't read, and I read a lot of mysteries, but I hadn't really read all or come across all that many that had a female protagonist, a female investigator who was, you know, strong but vulnerable and had kind of a maybe somewhat dark past and gone through some tough experiences that created some kind of inner conflict that she was trying to get over. So I had all of that going on that I wanted to try to incorporate into the story, which is where the backstory with the man from her past comes into play. I don't think it will give too much away if I say that the story begins with her having just recently been abducted, and she is able to escape this traumatic experience. At this point, she's still with the NYPD in New York City, and she moves to upstate New York with her fiance. His hometown is there. She really wants a fresh start in a much quieter, more peaceful kind of environment. And then, as tends to happen in these types of mysteries, once she gets there, she's thrown into a very dramatic case of a missing person that may in fact be a murder. So, and that is where her partner, Tim Wellington, comes in. And really his purpose in the story is to provide some contrast really for her internal conflict. She's kind of got some PTSD. She's trying to get over the experience of the abduction, which happened a year prior. She's still kind of obsessed with and fixated on the man who the serial killer who kidnapped her. And then here comes Tim, who's a small town boy, a local from a town where people don't really lock their doors, and he hasn't seen much crime. And so he, you know, there's a lot of back and forth between the two of them where he's kind of saying, I really don't think this is a big deal. This is a missing persons case. I know there's a lot of blood on the bed, but I'm sure that it's fine. The missing man will turn up. And then you have Shayna saying, wait a second, I come from a totally different experience. I have not seen, you know, things go this way and end well. So that was, you know, fun to write the scenes between the two of them and the dialogue with the two of them, because they're also new partners. So they're still trying to figure out what each other's techniques are and methods are for working a case and a crime, but coming at things from a very different background and a very different mindset.
Right, right. Now, people talk about this different ways, and I have, I think, an easy way to talk about plot is one thing and story is another. So the plot are the mechanics of, you know, who kills whom, who rushes through the door, you know, what that stuff. And story is really what's going on with the people. We've touched on this a little bit, talking about our lead characters and everything. So plot and story, but let's just talk about when you got going. This is Nikki, we'll start with you. When you got going on this and you were working it out, you said you worked it out over the course of a long time. How much did you have to change the plot? How many, you know, the horrible choices is, you know, making these choices is like climbing a wall, and you're always afraid you're going to climb to a spot where there's nowhere to move. And that's what writers face. So talk about that a little and how you dealt with that.
For myself, one of the first things that I had an editor go through, they pretty much pulled out a lot of the food scenes, because they're like, this is like a cookbook food, you know. Mm-hmm. It's like, you're making me way too hungry. We need to pare this down. And it was like, that's fine. So I ended up writing the recipes and putting them elsewhere. Mm-hmm. But when it came to choosing the different story, I had something to say. And I found that years ago, I was writing urban fantasy, and it was very intense and it was very dark. And, you know, I really felt proud about it, but it really brought me down. So I thought, okay, I still like the mystery aspect. I still love the grittiness of things, how can I say what I need to say, but do it in a way that will make you laugh, lighten the mood, but at the same time, go in that direction? Because I wanted to talk about more of injustice. And I mean, what better way when we have murders, and then we also, in our books, we have where we're solving that. We, you know, the world may not be just, but our stories turn out to be. And so I wanted to write that in a manner, and with my characters, yeah, there's food there. And that is part of a scene. It is part of its character. It's part of the story. Because if you look back, there's a Italian strawberry shortcake. It is a metaphor for what's going on in that scene. So each one of my foods that are ever mentioned, it's always a metaphor. And so sometimes the scene will come as far as the characters, or sometimes the food will come when I'm plotting out certain things. But one of the main things I wanted to write about, and I can't spoil it obviously for the end, but
Yeah.
you know, I actually took parts of real history. Aviation, I grew up on a military base. So I was around a lot of planes. I was around a lot of aviators. And so I was writing from that perspective. And there is a beautiful but slightly dark story that is real that I pulled from, and I wanted to address that aspect. So that was partially where the mystery came from, wanting to give light to a situation, wanting to talk about something that's pretty hard to talk about, but do it in a way that was a little bit more approachable, and gave a little bit more depth. So yeah.
Interesting. By the way, just one of the things that is really nice is you start that novel with no apologies. This is the world, here it is, and you're in it. And I like that very much. You know, let the reader figure it out.
Yeah.
And we're going. This,
Yeah.
you know, that was admirable, I thought.
Thank you. Thank you.
So, Nina, you know, again, in essence, you know, you're a playwright.
Yeah, I think I plot like a playwright, right? I think, what does my character want, right? And she wanted friends. And so what's going to get in the way of that? Well, how about one of her friends disappears and there's a serial killer on the loose, right? And then so everything she does, there has to be an obstacle, right? I think that's pretty much the rule of good playwriting. You know, your character wants to get somewhere and you just keep throwing obstacles in their way.
David Mamet.
Yeah, dead bodies washing up on shore, you know, friends that are acting suspiciously, you know, this creepy guy who seems to be hanging around, and it's and every step she takes, and even when she thinks she's making progress, you know, another obstacle, you know, or something she thinks is an obstacle, because of course teenagers are really self-obsessed and in their heads a lot. So it's easy for them to be paranoid, which, you know, helps with the structure as well. So yeah, I'm definitely like write first, plot later. You know, I start just getting as much as I can on paper, and then I go back and then I outline, and then I'm like, ooh, I have to throw half of this out. But that's really what I do.
Well, you know, a monologue, it reads in times, you know, a very, you know, intense monologue. And one of the things I was going to say in the introduction, I'll say this so everyone can hear now. There's a short story by Ring Lardner. Do you know it, called I Can't Breathe? You want to read it. And it's very reminiscent. The character in it is very reminiscent of yours. But you captured very well how, you know, a 15-year-old can see so much and get so much wrong at the same time. I used to coach a lot of girls that age, and so I was oh yeah, I know this, I've seen this. Yeah.
And it's funny, it wasn't in the first person. The early drafts were in the third person.
Were they?
Actually, it was not till later drafts that I rewrote it in the first person.
Well, talk for a second about that choice to make that change. That's a big change.
It was when I was querying and looking for an agent, and I had an agent say, you know, I really like this, and would you consider rewriting it in the first person? And I think I sat on that draft for 6 months, and then I said, you know what, she's right. So, so yeah.
Now, Tessa, you've got a it's not to say it's a complicated plot, but there's an elaborate structure, even though, and we're going to get to some of the things that are hard to do, I thought, in your novel, but talk about how it came together, the plot, and it has it melded with Shana,
Yeah,
who she
so
is.
well, it started off as a locked room mystery, which
Mhm.
in many ways is quite formulaic, actually. So I knew what I had to do in terms of introducing a number of suspects, and I knew that I wanted it to have kind of like a Poirot vibe, where there were these interrogation scenes, and in those scenes, readers began to learn more and more about each character that then revealed that that could be, a suspect with an actual motive for having committed the crime. And I started off that way, and I did try to plot it. And in the past, I hadn't plotted anything, and that was fine, but it took forever to write anything, because I then had to go back, like what Nina was saying, scrap entire chapters, start all over again, which in a way I think is a really good experience for a writer, because then you don't get to be, too precious with your words. And I think you get to the point sometimes where you're working with an editor who wants you to cut scenes or cut sections out, and you have to be okay with that. Or at least, it's nice if you can be willing to do something like that and work with the editor to get it to the point where everyone wants it to be. So I had that experience in the past. And so when I got to this point where I wanted to try a mystery, I thought I better plot it out, or I'm really going to have trouble. There are just a lot of characters, a lot of backstories, so many motives to keep track of, so many red herrings. So I started off writing it as kind of a traditional locked room mystery, and then got to the point where I realized it wasn't enough. And as I said, with the subplot idea, that's when I realized that I needed to have something more. And that's when Shana's backstory came in with the abduction. And then I just kind of started to weave that in with some flashbacks, and some moments of kind of inner conflict for her, where she's stuck physically, she's stuck on this island. It's a stressful situation. It would be for anyone, knowing that this crime had been committed and potentially there is, a killer on the loose, basically. But she also has a lot going on emotionally that she has to struggle through. So, I wanted to throw as many obstacles at her as possible, both kind of psychologically and then just physically in the
Right.
space, on the island, in the house, with all of these very dubious family members who might have actually, offed one of their own.
Right. And it's hard. The choreography of that is very tough, because you've got a bunch of people, you're keeping them in the living room, and she's still, she can't be in there with them the whole time because stuff has to happen. It's a tough bit of business. I want to get to one moment of that later, and we'll talk about moments. But so I want to talk about, we started to hit on this. If, you thought of it as locked room. I say it's, modern Gothic. You've got the beach thing, the steampunk thing. One of the things that happens, I think, a lot is, it happens a lot with noir, where people love noir and they go to write a noir and they want to hit the beats and it comes out dull. It just doesn't come out because they're being good children. They're staying with, the lessons that you're supposed to learn. And one thing all three of you did well, and I think the reason is that you let the emotion of the character, the feelings, dictate and move away from the expectations. So talk a little bit about that. We'll start with Nikki, how you've got a mystery. Your murder comes in relatively late, but it all works fine. Talk about that.
Okay, so my murder happens at the end of the first chapter. As hard as I tried to put the dead body a little sooner, but it was like,
wait a second. They're on the ship and the thing goes off. That's the first chapter?
I think it's the first chapter. No, don't quote me on that.
No.
I'm a liar. I probably like the third. Sorry, it's been a while.
Because in the first chapter, they have the incident where Pierre's arrested the first time.
Oh, that's right. Sorry. That was partially based on a true story with the bee. I'm not going to say anybody
Okay.
was, about it. I'm just going to say it may have been me, just saying. The bee scene. Anyway, when it comes to when I originally wrote the story, it was too dark. And I was writing it after a death of a friend. And it just got to the point where it was so morose. So I had to step back. And when I decided that I wanted to rewrite it, I thought, okay, one, we have to have a different tone about this. Murders it's still, something that's kind of intense and it needs to be solved, but I wanted to make sure that the story was a little bit more lively. And so the best way that I could describe it was, imagine if Lucy and Ethel were a couple and solved murders. And that pretty much just said it. Yeah. So that ended up being, what is the most bizarre thing that could happen, but it still moves the plot forward. So the reason, you'll see like in the beginning of like the first act, I bring in the bordello, and it was, and later on in the story, I was like, I got to bring this back. And so that scene ended up building on itself because it started off as a throwaway scene. I needed to get from point A to point B. I needed to plot point. And I just, I wanted to move forward. And instead it became something where I wrote it to cheer myself up because there was something going on in my life. And I wrote that scene and it became several pages long. But the fun part is that I was able to put clues in, and you don't notice it if you're laughing too hard and paying attention to that part. So it worked out well. And I found that using humor, at least for me, works better. And also I'm able to yes, I'm still able to follow the plot beats, but do it in a way that, it's a gentle way of kind of distracting you. I admire people that are able to put those points in there and it's, a serious scene and we can follow it. And I'm just like, I wish I could do that. That's not my skill set. So.
Well, it should be said that the bordello scene is terrific, and it results in romance. Yeah. So those are good bordello scenes.
It made my editor laugh so hard she cried. She was crying.
Excellent, excellent. So Nina, you've got, here's Kathy, and you've got a lot of misdirection in the novel, and a short novel is hard to do. You had me heading in the wrong direction. Talk about that. Talk about, because it's Kathy's perception, as we touched on.
Yeah, I think, it all goes back to like the voices in the teenager's head and what she thinks is real. And, so thrown into all of this, of course, is the boy she has the crush on. So I think, and I don't know if I knew I wanted misdirection when I started writing that. I think that just kind of happened as I went along. And I was like, wait, that's not what happened. And so I had this structure in place. And then it was like, if this really happened, And I have to say that there's a couple of Agatha Christie novels that are my favorite that really rely on misdirection, right? But if you read it really closely, like that it's that look in the hotel that the woman gives the other woman, and that's the big clue. So I tried to throw a few of those things in there to once I realized where things were heading. So then, of course, you have to go all the way back and do the full rewrite.
There's the choices. Yeah. So in Tessa, again, it's very much, you use emotion to get away from the expectations. In other words, you say she's got the PTSD, and she's got something going on. She's being gaslighted. Again, I don't want to say too much, but she's got to deal with all this that makes, it makes it a better novel than just hitting the beats.
Yeah. Yeah, I was just going to say, as far as, building that character arc goes, I think that's a helpful way of doing it, because then you give your protagonist an opportunity to overcome all of these, or many of the issues that, she's facing. And then toward the end, she finds herself in a slightly better position psychologically and emotionally, but she's definitely not where she needs to be yet. But that just makes it more interesting, I think, too, for readers. I mean, it's tough to have a detective or a sleuth, an amateur sleuth even, who gets everything right and doesn't, have any kind of emotional connection or issues or anything going on, like just, follows the clues. It's not the most interesting approach to me, I guess. So it's fun to weave in some emotion there and some psychology too, because then I think maybe as a reader, you can connect a little bit better with the character. As I was writing it, I thought to myself, okay, I mean, I'll put myself in her position, just like that time that I was on the island. It felt kind of like, what if this doesn't go well? Will I be trapped here, kind of thing. For her, that's very much what's going on, but it's also going on mentally too, because she's nowhere near ready to be back on a case like this, and didn't intend to be, and just got thrown into it thinking that she was going to have this peaceful life and peaceful new existence in upstate New York. And that's not at all what happens.
Well, one of the things is she's like a tough guy cop. And she's like, you've seen Mel Gibson play the part, actually, where they're saying, no, you got to rest, you got to go on vacation. And he says, screw you.
Mhm.
I'm on this. I'm fine. And she's, I'm fine. Don't worry about it.
Yeah.
You all have, I'm going to run out of time, believe it or not. We're going to go because we're going to do some questions. And everybody, by the way, if you have more questions, send them in. But there's a few more things I want to go over. One is there's some terrific moments. Sometimes you're writing, and you're writing along, you think you've got it right, but you need something that isn't that's the heart of what you're writing. And I want to talk about some of the moments in your books that I thought did that. It was Nikki, to me, there's a moment when they ask Pierre to fix the machine. And Alex knows this is a mistake. Alex knows this is gonna lead to trouble on the one hand, but on the other hand, as you said before, she's busy, she's got her job to do. She's a mother, she doesn't want to limit him. And it's a really nice moment between them and for her. Did that just happen, or did you say something you had to rework and rework?
That one, when I wrote that scene, my son was really little. Oh. So it was a moment that I, wished or anticipated or hoped for, like having that bond, having that moment, wanting to do as much as I can, but at the same time, not wanting to hover. I wanted to showcase Alex as a chef more of when she is outside the kitchen, she is not a basket case emotionally, but she is awkward and she is, her coordination is really off. But when she is in the kitchen, when she is teaching, that is where everything blossoms. And I wanted to write a kitchen scene. I wanted to write a character that was friendly and inviting, and not just a mom to one, but also a potential mentor. So it was writing a character, a person that I had wanted or needed to see at the same age that Pierre was. So it was coming through from that perspective. Yeah. Terrific.
Now, Nina, there's a boating accident, and a drunken woman is driving the boat, and everyone else on the boat is a teenager, and there's an injury, and a cop shows up, and the cop just lectures the kids. So did that just happen, or is that something you reworked? And
You know, as I said, I remember being in a boating accident when I was a teenager, and we were all just kids. There was no alcohol. We were like 13, and my friend's hand got pierced through by the other boat, and everybody's okay. Like we ended up joking about it later in life, but it was this horrifying experience, obviously.
Mhm.
And so I drew on that, and just the idea of I think just in terms of, the teenagers aren't going to even notice what's happening with the adults, right? And I think the authority figures are going to go after the teenagers. Maybe not, always, but at least in this world, I think that, because certainly the suspicion needed to sort of stay within that group. And again, it's without telling too much, it's part of the misdirection.
Very much, very much. Now, and then it's also part of the broader sense of the adults are from an alien world.
Yeah.
Right. Even her aunt is so cryptic and but just so mysterious to her. She,
And I think that has to be, it's an element of a lot of young adult fiction, right? You got to keep the adults away, because, and nowadays, any reasonable kid might say, gee, maybe I should ask an adult for help, but that never happens. I mean, maybe it actually does in real life, but in fiction, it really can't.
Right. Tessa, we talked about the choreography of this mansion, and your hero walking around in the mansion and what to do. And you do an interesting thing. She arrives, she looks at the scene where the blood is. She says, get everybody into the living room. And then she goes up and down the corridors trying doors. And every door is unlocked but one. Aha. She goes downstairs. She talks to everybody. She interviews, gets the lay of the land down there of who's who. Then she goes back up and the door's unlocked. Talk about how you came to that choreography, because I thought it worked pretty well.
Yeah, I guess, so this is a historic kind of estate where she is. This is a part of the world where, the Rockefeller types from the golden era of New York City would have summer homes, and many of them did have summer homes. So this is one of those homes that the family has a textile business, and it's old money kind of thing. So this is a huge area, and she's by herself, and all she has for backup is her partner, because they're in this storm and nobody else can get out to the island at the moment. And her partner needs to stay with, the witnesses and potentially the suspects to make sure that they don't converse with each other and, come up with some kind of strategy for how they're going to get out of this, should they perhaps be guilty. So I needed to create a way for her to do all the things that I figured probably would need to be done in this scenario, which was search the house, search the island. And it seemed like a good way to put her into the very first situation where she would have to interrogate someone who looked really guilty. I mean, I knew that I wanted it to be the first suspect really seemed like he could be it. And I won't say that he's not it, but definitely that played a part. And there's a moment too in that scene where she sees something in the room, something about him that the chapter ends on that note where she thinks, okay, I might be onto something here. And that is what I love about the classic detective fiction, police procedural type of stories, is you get these little clues as you go along. It's like a breadcrumb trail. And it's fun to be able to read stories like that. I also love the mysteries where the reader doesn't stand a chance of figuring anything out until something is revealed toward the end, because that's just such a, roller coaster thrill ride approach. But this is in this more traditional kind of format. That's really what I was going for, was here are the clues. You know, as a reader, you can figure it out. You can figure it out. I haven't had many people say that they were able to figure it out, which I guess is a good thing.
Right.
But it starts with that one moment, and then that's not the only moment either, of course, that exists with that character. And the more that Shane interacts with him, the more she is able to, you know, plumb the depths of his secrets and figure out what his relationship is to the other characters.
So we're going to run. There's a few questions, and here's one you're all going to love. And it's, how do you know when you have real talent as a writer? How do you know when what you're doing is something other people would enjoy reading? It's a great question. Nikki, you start.
I'm still trying to figure that one out.
There you go.
But at the same
answer.
time, yeah, but it's like I try not to talk myself out of writing. I do the best that I can. And I write for myself first now.
Mhm.
And I found that certain techniques work best for me. I write in scenes, and sometimes they're out of order, but I write certain scenes based on the mood that I'm in. So if something needs to be darker, or if I'm like in a foul mood, I'll write it that way. And I found that that works for me. And it allows me to have the range that I need within the story. And that works. I was told prior to Maison Death, I should not write about food, leave that out, nobody cares. Write about something else, just get to the point of the story. And I'm like, you have a culinary school. Like, how are you gonna like not talk about food at a culinary school? And so for a long time, I was told, don't do this, don't do that. People don't do that. Your opening line for the story, if it hadn't have been for the ice cream cone, Alex LeBeau wouldn't have found herself in jail. I was told, why are you calling her by her first name? Why are you doing all these things? And I could go on and on about the negative. And it punched me down for a while until I realized this is a story I don't see. And I want to see this. I want to see joy. And it got to that point where I just put that aside and wrote the story that I wanted to see, and wrote it for my friends to make them laugh or make them hungry. And so now that is where my focus is. As I talk with Gail Carriger, she has written so many steampunk novels. And one of the best things she said to me about other people, when somebody says something negative about your work, and it's not about the craft of your work, she says, just tell them you're not my audience and move on. Right. She's like, write for your audience. She's like, if it's a niche, that's okay. But write for you, write for your audience. And so that's what I do now. So if somebody needs a good laugh, they know to come to me. But if they also know that they want to, you know, have a serious discussion about something underneath that laughter, I'm the person to go to. So right. I don't know if I have talent, but I know this is what I do well.
Very good. Now, Nina, answer, but also answer. There's another question that fits in, and so it's, how do you know whether it's a short story or a play or a novel?
That's a great question. Sometimes I just see it, right? So I don't know about the talent part. I just have to write, right? Like it's, and I love what Nikki said, write for yourself, because if you're trying to like always write for somebody else and to please them, I write to please myself right now. It makes me really happy. And when right now I'm writing a screenplay, right? And I thought it might be a novel. And it's like, no, it's gonna be a screenplay, right? I think it's how much dialogue and how much narrative I hear in my head, or if I'm seeing a picture. And if I'm seeing a picture if I'm hearing dialogue, it's usually going to be a play. If I start hearing narrative and setting, it's going to be a short story or a novel. And if I'm seeing images that I don't have words for, I'm like, that's going to be the screenplay.
Right. Yes. Yes. Tessa, for you, how did you know?
I guess, you know, I got to the point where I had written something that I thought was a novel. This was many, many years ago. And when I started to feel comfortable enough with it that I could give it to friends and family to read, and they came back to me and said, yeah, I think you have something here. And I should note too, friends and family who are big readers themselves in that same genre, because that's, I think, a big part of it too. And that made me realize that this was the type of story that I wanted to be writing and that maybe could be writing. And so, yeah, I mean, it was really just, that was when I realized that I might actually get somewhere if I started to do this seriously, and maybe I should be looking for a literary agent, and maybe this can turn into something.
So very quickly, and then we're going to sign off, a lightning round of 2 or 3 of your favorite authors. Nikki, go.
Zigzag Claiborne, he has a new one coming out. I think it's, was it Afro Puffs are the antenna of the universe. So he writes action-packed comedy, like futuristic, I know it's not mystery, but futuristic, absolute fun. Like he has a way of setting a scene and it's rich. Let's see, Gail Carriger, and oh goodness, Nicole Givens. She does murder mysteries, and there's also science fiction based too. So it's
Great.
Pretty cool. So.
Great. And very quickly, when's your next book coming?
Oh gosh, I got a novella coming out, Suzette and the Holiday Hangover. So that one's coming out at the end of November, beginning of December.
Excellent. Nina, favorite authors?
Oh gosh, well, Agatha Christie, Tana French. I discovered Kelly Garrett's Hollywood Homicide this summer, and I'm like, oh my gosh, it just made my.
Isn't it good? Oh my god.
So yeah.
And new plays, new books.
I just adapted Antigone. So yeah.
You're not ambitious, are you? Great. Tessa, you've got a book coming December. I know that. And that's the next Shana mystery, Shana Merchant. And favorite authors.
Favorite authors, I love Tana French also. Jane Harper, Louise Penny. I read almost entirely thrillers and mysteries. Andrew Piper, who's a Canadian author who is amazing. I love to read his work too. Marcus Seiki, whose stuff is more thriller, even veering toward kind of somewhat science fiction-y. Yeah, they're just, I mean, there are so many, but it's fun to talk about.
Well, you're all terrific. This, I hope the audience enjoyed it. And I know I did. And I thought it was really interesting. I want to hand this back to Tom Straw now from MWA. Here's Tom. And thank you, everyone. That was a lot of fun.
Thank you.
Thank you, David. Thank you, everyone.
My pleasure.
Thanks, David, and your panelists, Nina Mansfield, Tessa Wegert, and Nikki Woolfolk. And those of you who are watching, if you want to thank them, buy their books. I'd also like to thank, as ever, the Ferguson Library in Stamford, Connecticut for its ongoing support, plus the Mystery Writers of America, New York, Connecticut chapter for putting this on. A reminder that tonight's hour was recorded and will be available on YouTube tomorrow, I understand. So if you missed any of it, go to the Ferguson Library link. I have 2 quick plugs before I go. Next week, 1 week from now, at this time, Thursday, November 5th, Joel Fletcher is going to moderate a craft panel with some crafty guests, Alexia Gordon, Richie Narvaez, and my pizza pal and partner in crime, Reed Farrell Coleman. And finally, big deal night 3 weeks from tonight, November 19th, a conversation with the legendary Walter Mosley and breakout author S.A. Cosby. The only crime would be to miss it. Thank you very much for joining us tonight. We'll see you next week.